You've reached Monster 911, and I'm Lance Hightower. I've been taking cryptid emergency calls for over 5 years. If you have a cryptid emergency, please call our toll-free number 866-306-8085. I can help you. What's your emergency? All right there, sir. Thank you so much. I'm kind of in a... Where I do my work in the evening and call is actually in our storage area, so I've kind of converted it to a small makeshift little studio where I can kind of get away.
Yeah.
And but you know, it's kind of nice and quaint for me right now until which time in the future I can build a little. The envision is to build something just quaint, kind of log cabinish.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so just, you know, but I can't get away from ultimately any sounds, which people don't mind. I'm only 150 yards from a railroad track, so...
Were you near Tulsa, or...?
I used to be. We were about... we were in Tulsa County, about a mile north of Broken Arrow Pride Stadium. So I just told people we were Broken Arrow. And... but we were there for 12 years, and then just by a blessing's what I call it, my wife was looking on Zillow, and there was a piece of property in this little town we never heard of. And I thought, where's that at? And she said, well, it's between...
Huh.
And I said the same thing. I said, oh, that's interesting. Let's go take a look. So when we got there, the homestead's over 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
The house we live in is over 100 years old. And it was actually moved on location. It's 5 acres, and the only thing we can figure is that they had the wrong address on Zillow, so people couldn't find it. But,
exactly.
But we found it, and we love it. I actually, at the end of my driveway, I have 12,000 acres, wildlife management, hunting, and fishing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I think so, too.
Yeah, so where we live down by the, we live in the base of the Ozarks, right at the border of Oklahoma and Arkansas, on the other side.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful place. I know exactly. I grew up in Braggs, Oklahoma.
Okay. Yeah. Braggs.
When I was a kid, my dad's first job, you could say, in the Oklahoma State Parks, when he was a ranger back in 72, it was in Braggs or Greenleaf State Park.
Okay. Yep. I know where you're talking about. I know where Greenleaf is. So I live on the other side of. Currently, me and my wife, we moved here. We were originally from another county called Sequoyah County. Salisal is the seat of that county, and you've heard of the Grapes of Wrath. They have a Grapes of Wrath festival because Salisal was mentioned in that book, the Grapes of Wrath. And I actually grew up in a little community, little outskirt of Salisal called Aikens, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I know where it's at.
Aikens, I live probably, I don't know, about 6 miles from Sequoyah's home, which was the gentleman of the Cherokees who wrote the Cherokee alphabet.
Yeah.
Where we currently live is where the Trail of Tears ended. All this area back before statehood was known as Flint District, and Judge Isaac Parker out of Fort Smith was control of this region, and would send marshals and deputies down in here to kind of run this place back in the day whenever it was just Native Americans mainly. So that's kind of where we live now. I grew up at Aikens all my life basically, and after I got out of school, I went into the service, into the Army, and spent 15 years. Got out and went into law enforcement here locally, and I had a break in service, and September 11th happened. Went back into the service and got injured, and now I'm a Class 2 federal firearms manufacturer located here. We've been here doing this for almost 20 years now. So we manufacture submachine guns, suppressors, stuff like that for law enforcement, military, and civilian use. So that's kind of our background and story. Me and my wife both graduated from Salisal High School, and but where the events that took place, what I seen happen in the little community of Aikens.
Okay, so yeah, that background is really sufficient, and I appreciate that. My background with I come out of healthcare,
Uh-huh.
and then the rest of my family, there's a few that are in healthcare, and the rest are in law enforcement.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's kind of split down the middle. It could have been either way. With me, I my goal was to be a SEAL, Navy SEAL, but
Yeah.
I thought about it and I thought, if I plan on getting married, I can't really t-
Yeah, that's true.
tell her where
That's,
I'm going and what happened. So,
yeah,
um, so I went.
I worked with a lot of those guys. I was a Bravo 4 guy in the service. I went in as infantry and ended up becoming a Bravo 4 guy with the Scout Sniper unit, and um, I was also an instructor trainer. When I got out of the military, went to civilian side, became a CLEAT instructor for the state of Oklahoma, law enforcement educational training,
Mm-hmm.
and was one of the very first narcotic officers for this area, and went to DEA and FBI school for clandestine labs because we was having a big problem with methamphetamines in this area. And so me and another gentleman were the only two that could break down and log these labs and that kind of stuff. And we actually have a Bigfoot symposium that happens in our little town every year. It's a pretty big deal for our town. And it's kind of a weird thing because the sheriff there was a sheriff here at one time back in the 80s, and I know him very well. I worked for him whenever I worked for as a lieutenant at the police department, and he was the sheriff. These two boys came in and said they were attacked by Bigfoot, and it made the news everywhere. And they actually had scratches all over their backs, everything else. And the sheriff investigated. He was the youngest sheriff in Oklahoma City record, but the sheriff, because the news media was just hounding him. And so he had a potted plant in his office, and he had like a little plastic, like a caveman bill, and he stuck it in that potted plant and took a picture of it. And so when the news media come by, he would show them this picture, and they just ate it up. They never realized it was fake. And he finally, the boys finally came out and confessed that it wasn't Bigfoot that attacked them. They was a hoax. They put it all on. But in this area, we do have a lot of opposable sightings of it. So there is a symposium that happens every year. It just happened a couple of weekends ago. They come here every year and bring people from everywhere. Here at the base of the Ozarks, there's a lot of tales here. We live probably about 3 miles from probably one of the most haunted places, they say, in this area. People from Tulsa come down during Halloween. My road is full of people, and that place is called it's actually called Beaver Gap, and it's an old Cherokee cemetery. They built little houses on top of their graves, and they believe that a small race of Native Americans called Skillies live there in those little houses, and they're kind of tricksters, kind of like the leprechaun of Irish lore.
Yeah,
And
the Alaskans and some of the people around here call them the little people.
yeah, they call them little people here too. But I had a dispatcher I worked with, and he was an AIM American Indian. American Indian movement people are very, I don't want to say they're racist, but they're very, when it comes to white people, they've got their own feelings about it. And every time I'd come in, he would talk about, a red man herder and all this stuff. And I would always shut him up. I'd say, hey, let's talk about those skillies. And man, he would just shut up completely because they believe talk about them, they're there,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
absolutely. That's why it's really hard to. I've had a few
Yeah.
open up, but you hit it right on the head. When they feel that if they talk about it, it will then manifest itself.
If you will really talk about it, I mean, I've talked to some Native Americans. When I was a deputy here, I was pretty well known to be. I'd go and talk to the elders of the families because if you had a problems out of their grandchildren or their children, you would just go to the mother the grandmother, because she was the matriarch, and she would handle all the problems. But by doing that, I got to talk to a lot of the Native Americans around here and talk about some of the lore and legends that they brought from Tennessee and those areas up here, and what they kind of believed in. And I was kind of raised around that because I was not very far from a place called Nycut, and Nycut was a heavily Native American population area, and Wiscoya's home there and stuff. I grew up, I grew up in a very abusive home. Whenever I was 16, I got took and put into a foster home because of it. But I grew up in a very abusive home. So when I tell you this story, what I heard to me. It'll make more sense as it goes along.
Okay.
So this was back in 1986. I
And
remember it
and
because
and before
I,
we get started, I'll just say we will take out any names or specific locations as well as occupations, whatever. That's typically
okay.
my policy, but if you want, I can leave in. It's up to you.
I have no problem with you using names. I have no problem
Okay.
with
Okay. I just want to let you know from the very beginning, but please, I'm sorry to interrupt. You
yeah,
continue.
yeah. I've came to a grip with myself on this, and I for a long time I didn't want to talk about it, and so even when I was in the service, I seen a lot of things that were questionable in the sky and different things, just like any observers do. But later on, when I got into life, it really started to bug me about 4 years ago. It really started to bug me, and a friend of mine that works with a lot of movie industries, and he's an artist. I talked to him about it, and he was like, well, he said, you could draw it, but he said, if you really want to kind of figure out what you've seen, just get you some sculpting clay and sculpt it. He said, a lot of times this helps to, bring your mind's eye into it and what you kind of may have seen. And so, I'll tell you, we'll start what happened is back in 86, I was 13 years old. And I remember it was the fall of 86. It was around my birthday in September, and it was extremely hot that year. And we were outside doing yard work like any country people do, just, raking and cleaning the yard and doing stuff. And I was very attentive to my stepdad because he was very abusive to me. And so I hear him hollering at me and telling me to go over and get the neighbor. And the neighbor was probably 200 yards from our house. The next house was in front of us. And so I took off across the driveway and went into the neighbor's driveway and ran up and got the neighbor. And the neighbor come to our house. And when he did, because my stepdad was hollering, tell the neighbor, bring his gun and come here. And I thought, what in the world? So I took off, ran over and got the neighbor. Neighbor came over with his gun. And when we got back to the house, I don't know why I didn't notice it, because when I got to the house, I got to the back side of the house. My stepdad's sitting there with my mom, and my two little sisters are running around, and they're all looking up in the sky. And it was towards the west, and up in the west in the sky there was this silver metallic sphere just sitting there in the air. I mean, it was huge. I mean, I couldn't, being 13 years old, it would be hard for me to explain the size of it. What I remember, it looked like the sun in the sky, basically. It was that kind of big. And it just kind of sat there. And at first, the neighbor starts hollering and say, oh, it's probably some weather balloon or something that got loose from over in Fort Smith, from the, weather, one of the weather centers over there or something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it started moving. It started coming kind of towards us. But it was confusing because even though I thought it was coming towards us because it seemed like it was getting bigger, it actually didn't look like it was really moving. And I remember we're focused on this, and I'm looking for the sun, and the sun it's setting, and so it's kind of over there to there, but it's so bright and almost mirror complected, this sphere is. And then all of a sudden, I mean, it just zips to the left and it's gone. And my neighbor looks over at my stepdad and goes, man, I don't know what that was. And so this happened on a Wednesday. And come the next day, we didn't see anything. Come Friday night or Friday, my stepdad tells me that, you can't plan anything this weekend, or you can't go see your friend. Cause I lived in the wooded population of Aikens, and where I lived, there were old homesteads that had fell down hundreds of years ago, but it's mainly wooded areas and farming land, cattle, stuff of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a friend that lived up the road, and me and him played in those woods. We played in the creeks. That was our playground. I mean, I knew the woods like the back of my hand, because there was nothing else for us to do out in the country but go and trifle in the woods. So my stepdad tells me that he's going to go hunting. He's going to go hunting Saturday night, and I can't, go and stay over to friends or whatever. And I pretty much knew what that meant. It meant that I was going to carry a 12-volt battery on my back, and then we're going to spotlight for deer. So Saturday day comes, and him and his buddy are sitting there, and they get the light wired up, and I put this backpack on. It's got a 12-volt battery in it, and they wired a car lamp light bulb to some wires. And when darkness fell, we go probably about 300, 400 meters from our house. There's a field with an old abandoned house there that fell in. And if you think of this field, it's a very open field, but on all four sides is heavy woodland.
Mm-hmm.
And what we would do is he would set off into the woods, and as the deer come into the field, because there were cattle in this field too, and the cattle usually would mosey on down towards the road area where they were usually fed, and they kind of nested at night. So we go up by this house and sit there in the woods and wait for the deer to come out into the moonlight. Because I remember in September, it was really, the moon was out and it was very bright. I could clearly see, the old fallen house. I could see the open field, and we're sitting in this wood line and we're waiting. And all of a sudden we all hear this noise, and it sounds like animals tearing the crap out of something. Just like coyotes or dogs or something, just you would think something was being just mauled. And all of a sudden, out of the darkness on the other side of the field, I see this animal fly through the air, and it hits, and it's a dog. I can tell it's a dog, or a canine. It was some of a canine family. Well, it hops back up and it darts right back into the darkness of the woods. Well, about that time, this thing steps out, and it's got like 3 dogs on it, and these dogs are just tearing it up. I look around, and my stepdad and his friend, they're gone, and they ran so fast that they ripped the wires off the battery. So here I am, 13 years old, out in this wood line. This thing's coming across this field, and I just withdraw underneath the cedar tree, and I watched this thing because I was so scared. I was crying. I was so scared. This thing lurks out of the darkness, and like I said, it's fighting these dogs. And to me, it looked like it had to be 9 to 10 foot tall. It was very large, but it wasn't like thick body. It didn't look like it had any hair. It looked like it was very slick skin. It looked like it was almost double jointed in the legs, meaning that it had a common knee, but when it got down to its feet were almost reversed on a joint also. And it was bipedal. It was upright, and it was fighting these dogs. And I watched this thing cross the field continually to fight these animals. And then it went into the other side of the field where it was dark. Well, so I hid underneath this cedar tree until daylight came. And when daylight came, I immediately jumped up and ran as hard as I could home. Well, when I got home, my mother was there, my stepdad and his friend. And my mother was concerned at the time, which she really wasn't, but she was. She's, trying to figure out where I was. And nobody came and looked for me. Well, Sunday came. This was Sunday morning. Everything was fine. No big deal. So on the weekdays, I would always have to get up around 4 o'clock in the morning and fix my stepdad's lunch for the day, get his clothes ready, and draw him a bath every morning. If I didn't, there was a good beating that come along with it. So it was one of the things I had to do. So I'm up getting stuff on around 4 o'clock in the morning. My stepdad would always get up on the money. He would get up, go to our front porch, urinate off the front porch, and then come back in. Well, I'm in there fixing his sack lunch, and I hear him, and he's hollering. He said, "Bring me my rifle." And my mom apparently heard it before, or heard it during when I came around the house, inside the house. She heard it, and she grabbed his lever action rifle off the rack in the hallway and brought it to him. Well, about that time, I made it out the front of the door, and I look over, and it's hard to explain over the phone. I could show you how it was, but across the way in our neighbor's driveway, this thing that we'd seen that Saturday night is crouched down, like it's crouched down almost into a seated position. And whenever he goes to bring his firearm up, this thing stands up and just takes off running down the ditch line towards the wooded area. And it runs so fast, I'd never seen anything two-legged run this fast. So daylight comes, we immediately go out there. He's got his gun. We're looking, and all we can find is where in the ditch line, the tall grass, the wheat grass, is separated, but there's no tracks. There's no tracks at all. So that was the last experience physically I had with any of this or seeing any of this. So, I just kind of wrote it off. Maybe I seen, people say, oh, it's probably a bear with mange. Well, we don't have bear around here. We have little black bear, but nothing that big. And then some of the native people I talked to at school and stuff would say, oh, it was probably a Sasquatch, or well, I'm like, it didn't look like a Sasquatch, what you think of a Sasquatch. And then other people say, oh, it could have been a skinwalker, basically. And back then, skinwalker wasn't really what they called it. They called it, some of them called them
shapeshifter.
Yeah, a shapeshifter, or a wadango, or winged dingo, or something.
Yeah.
And I never really took into it. I can tell you, I never went back out in the woods to that day. I was scared to death because I'd never seen. I mean, I played in the woods since I was 10, 11. It's 13. I played in the woods since I was about 8 years old, and never seen anything or ran across anything like that. So fast forward to about 4 years ago. This really keeps coming back in my mind as I think on it, and in my dreams and everything else. And I'm just tired of it. So I go to sculpting, and I sculpt the figurine that you've seen that I sent you pictures of.
Yes.
I went on to a couple of cryptid sites on Facebook, and I posted a picture of what I had made out of clay. And immediately I get this message from a man who's in St. Petersburg, Russia. And he tells me, he says, I've seen them before. I had 3 of them in my kitchen. And I said, wait a minute here. Are we talking about the same thing? So I immediately try to check this guy out because I don't know who he is. He's off this cryptid site.
Right.
And it's something else. So I immediately go on the cryptid site, and if you pull up their name on a cryptid site on these Facebook sites, it'll show you posts that they put in before. Well, a year and a half earlier, he had posted a draw picture of almost exactly what I seen. So I'm in communications with this guy all that night. I'm talking to him. I say, where did you see these? Do you know what they are? And he's like, he doesn't know what they are. He had been told that they were reptilian soldiers. He'd been told all this stuff. Well, I get up the next morning because I didn't hardly sleep that night. And I get back online, and I think, well, I'm going to try to contact him. I go to contact him. No name, no nothing, no Facebook page, no nothing's left of this guy. So I really was like, okay, this guy was just shooting the crap with me, and maybe I thought it was still strange that he had a picture of one he drawed that almost looked exactly what I seen. So in my hometown of Sequoyah County, they have a local Sequoyah County Facebook page. And I just put on there, I said, I typed on there, I said, something's really been bothering me about something that happened in 1986. And different people came on there, posted different things. But one guy comes on there and he said, you're talking about the fireball that was in the sky? And so I contacted him, and I found out he was a friend of mine's brother. And I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? He said, man, over in Hanson, which Hanson's only maybe 15 miles from Aikens. He said, for 3 nights, there was a giant ball of fire in September in the sky. And, I didn't see a ball of fire, but I remembered the ball that we seen in the sky,
Right.
And I don't know if there's any connection to it or anything. So everything kind of went dead from there. I had people contact me telling me, yes, that's a reptilian soldier. And so I started looking up reptilians. My son's an anthropologist. And so I told him to look in it. He says, Dad, yeah, there were some Mesopotamian statuettes that were found in Mesopotamia, supposedly these reptilian bipedal creatures. There's other things in history that talk about these reptilian type creatures. And even one of his friends who's a paleontologist said, well, you have to look at dinosaurs. We know they were becoming bipedal at the end of their period, and they had larger brains and they could communicate. So there could have been an offshoot of a human type ancestry, just like we have involved that, but we don't know. We haven't ever found remains. So it wasn't until contacted me because of my business, and they came down, and I'm sitting here, we're talking about things. We're talking about the Bible and different things. And I said, hey guys, I'll share something with you that bugs me. And I told him about it. Well, he tells me he has a friend in Oregon that had a similar situation, and that if he didn't mind, he was going to contact him. Well, because this guy in Oregon, I guess he's in Oregon, he said he was going to write a book and have pictures of what he'd seen. So when I was going home, all of a sudden I get a text from this guy's number, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to do a three-way call for you, but I wanted to show you what he drawed." And this was a drawing that he'd done before I knew. I mean, it was something that he's writing a book on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he sends me the picture, and my wife goes, "That's exactly what you sculpted." So I get on a three-way call with, and the guy comes on there, and we're talking a little bit about it. And he said, "Before I say anything, it hasn't really told me a lot what you said, other than the picture of what you sculpted he sent to me." And I thought, that looks exactly what I seen. And so he said, "Let me tell you what happened." I said, "Okay." Ford was on the line too. I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, whenever I was about 12, he said, I was really into aliens. He said, I prayed every day for aliens to come see me." And he said, "One day I walk out, and above the tree line is this silver sphere." And I didn't say anything at the time. I was like, this can't be true. This guy's saying that he's seen a silver sphere. I didn't even tell this guy. I didn't tell the guy, what's going on here. So he then tells me that he blacked out. He didn't remember much till later. And then the images of these creatures came to him, and he thought that demons were after me, and that it was some type of demon that he thought it was. And he actually named it Nephilim, is what he named it in his book. But that's kind of where I'm at, man. And I just, I have called, I listened to a couple of podcasts and stuff, and KGRA is one of them, and they do a lot of cryptos and UFOs and stuff. And there was a guy on there from Skinwalker Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And I called in that night, and I told the guy what I seen, and he said, there has been sightings of something similar to that, but they didn't have anything to do with anything in the air. They were seen coming out of these manifested portals or holes. And I thought, well, okay, and that's kind of where I'm at, man. And I'm just trying to figure out if other people have seen what I've seen. Am I crazy, or is this something that I'm manifesting in my memory that maybe I didn't see it correctly? It just one of the things you always have to answer. You have to ask yourself. Now I've got somebody in St. Petersburg, Russia, that says they've seen 3 of them in his kitchen. Got a guy in Oregon that says he's seen one, and the drawing matches what I sculpted. It's just things are coming together. Like, what are these things? Why are they here?
Right.
Kind of thing. I mean, as a Bravo 4 guy with the military, I was a trained observer. I was a scout sniper. I'd done a lot of things, and I've been to Korea. I've been to other countries, and we've seen weird things in the sky and different things that didn't make sense. Different cultures do different things, but never nothing to that point. And it was hard for me to come out and talk about this because, as a prior military man and law enforcement in the community down here and stuff, I didn't want people to look at me and think of, oh, this guy's crazy, or maybe he's a little off his rocker because he's talking about when he's 13 years old, he had an encounter with some kind of creature.
Right.
And I'm just searching, man. I'm just kind of searching to trying to figure out what I seen and what it might have been.
Well, if we go back when you heard this thing, we know that you said there was a dog. There was 3 dogs, correct?
Yeah.
And that one of the dogs you saw being more or less thrown out of the woods into this field.
Yep.
And then it got back up. So we know that, what kind of dogs were these, by the way?
They had to be, I remember the one that was thrown was a pretty large dog, maybe a German Shepherd, something of that nature. And I raised Shepherds for a long time, so I know about what they, size by. The other 2 dogs, they could have been coyotes. The coyotes around here are pretty small, but it could have been a coyote. But I seem to think either it was just a stray pack of dogs, or maybe some dogs that, because we have other neighbors around there, but none of our neighbors talked about any of their dogs injured. And I didn't find any dog carcasses or see any dead dogs out there. That was something that I looked for as I was getting out of there and trying to get. I was looking for these animals to see if they killed them, and I couldn't find any remains.
But it wasn't your dogs.
No, it was not my dogs. No.
Okay. How far were you when you were under this cedar? Were you under the cedar tree yet when you saw this dog being hurled into this field?
Oh, I wasn't under cedar tree at that point. We were actually sitting on the edge of the wood line. We were probably a good, probably 150 feet away, somewhere where like that from it.
And it was you and who else?
It was me, my stepdad, and one of his friends. And my stepdad now has passed away, and the friend hasn't. And my mom remembers it too. I talked to my mom also. I said, "Do you remember this when I was a child?" She said, "Yeah, I remember it being over in the neighbor's driveway when it stood up and ran down the drive line." You know, and she remembers what happened that night of the hunt. So I mean, we were all. It was an illegal hunt. They were spotlighting, and like I said, we were about 150 feet away from the one side of the tree line to the back side, because it came out where this old house is, and it fell in. There's a tree line right behind it, and it came out of that tree line right beside the house. And that was when we first seen the first dog come flying through the air, and it hit and yelped, and it jumped back up, and man, it was directly back on it. And then when it stepped out, the other two, one of them was, I mean, it was almost like it was on its limbs, these dogs were tearing the crap out of it. We thought, I mean, that's what I thought. But when it was throwing them like it was nothing, it was extremely strong. But it wasn't. It wasn't like when you picture a Bigfoot, you picture a big beastie looking muscle,
Mm-hmm.
hairy thing. This thing wasn't. It was more slender and almost like its skin. I mean, it was almost like if it had any type of clothing on, it would have had to been skin tight. But it was almost like if you think of something like something with a wetsuit on, it was kind of like that. It didn't have any hairy. It wasn't hairy in that way. And I remember the moonlight kind of glistened off of it.
Oh,
What
interesting.
I remember that mainly because at first I thought maybe it could have been a human, but when it stepped out and it was so big, and its arms and legs were so disappointed. What got me was its legs. Whenever it stepped out, like I said, it's almost as if it was double jointed in the legs. It had a regular knee, like it bent forward, but then at the ankle, where we have an ankle usually, it was almost like it was another knee reverted.
Gotcha.
And I remember because when it stepped on, there was logs there, and it stepped on where the beside this house where it had fallen. This thing stepped up on this log to go over it, and it was almost like it had digits on its feet, and it was able to crisp that and step on over it. And like I said, it was fighting these dogs all the way across the field until it acted like it didn't really bother it. Like it was fighting these dogs, but it wasn't stopping what it was doing.
Mm.
These dogs weren't strong enough that it was affecting where it was wanting to go.
Okay. And so it you were by yourself when you saw this happen, it sounds like. Is that
Well,
correct?
I was with my stepdad, his friend, and it was me. And when the creature stepped out the first time, when it threw the animal and it stepped out of the darkness, my stepdad and his best friend disappeared. They ran. And they ran so fast that they ripped the wires off the light. They left me out there.
Oh, that's the okay, gotcha. They just left you there.
Yeah, they left me there. That's what really made me fear. Here I am with no lights. I don't have any weapon. I've got a 12-volt battery in a backpack on my back, and the only thing I knew to do was to crawl up inside the cedar tree and try to remain quiet, and not make any noise, and hopefully it didn't see me.
Did this creature see your stepdad and his friend?
Well, I what I can remember is when they took off, I remember it turning, but then it immediately turned back and just continued on what it was doing. It didn't act like it was going to go after them or whatever. It was too in whatever it was doing. It was too in tune to those animals that were attacking it and wherever it was going.
Okay, I'm with you now. Okay. So you were about 150 feet, you say, somewhere in that range?
Yeah. That's what it would have been, about that range. Because I used to the old farmer that had that field house in that field. He used to pick me up every day after school and help me. I'd help him go and feed his cattle in that field. So I was pretty knowledgeable how far things were away when I was a kid. Um, and like I said, its stride, its movement, and its stride was not like a regular human. It movement and stride. It went across that thing very rapidly, even with these animals hitting on it. It didn't. I mean, it didn't take no time for it to cross in the area that it crossed in front of. It was probably this opening probably was about 200, 300 feet that it crossed in front of this opening, and it was nothing. It strided across there like nothing, like it wasn't being affected.
So you saw that it threw a canine, and it had, prior to that, you said it had a scream to it of some sort.
Yeah,
What?
that was the first thing we noticed, because when we heard the noise, this horrible welch or scream, and we heard the dogs, how dogs growl and snarl and barking and different things like that. And we have a bunch of coyotes in the area, so we thought maybe it was coyotes, because coyotes will yelp. You'll hear them yelp around here, and they'll laugh almost. Coyotes do. They howl. And that's what we first kind of thought, was that a pack of hot coyotes may have got a deer, or, got a cow down or whatever. We didn't know. But this was a different type of sound. And like I said, it was kind of masked by these gnarling, growling, attacking dogs. And then, like I said, when it stepped out, when that dog came out, I stepped out, and then they first said, "What in the world is that?" And then all of a sudden it stepped out. Well, I was focused on whatever this thing was, and I look up and they're gone. They have left me, and
Wow.
then the fear started stepping in, and I'm not ashamed to say I cried, man. I was scared. I was definitely scared for my life.
Sure.
But I don't know what more scared me, was that it didn't notice me, or that I didn't know where it was. As far as when it went into the other side of the wood line, I didn't know where this thing was. So I stayed there till morning. We're talking 1, 2 o'clock in the morning when all this happened. And I stayed there till, 7 or 8 when daylight came, to run home, to where I could see what was in front of me or what was in the woods with me.
Did those dogs follow that?
Yeah, they continued to attack it all the way across the field.
Wow. Did it make any further noise after that?
Not really, not really. It was just like I said, it was just throwing these animals. But one thing it got, like I said, the way its stride was, it was like it was effort. It was no effort for it to continue with these dogs on it. I mean, it didn't even act like it was, like more of a nuisance to it than it was hurting it.
Hmm. Wow. So when you saw this stride of this thing, what did this stride look like? You said it was kind of almost, it had a knee structure, which
Yeah.
is like a hinge joint, and then it almost had like another type of joint before it.
It almost had like another wrist down by its foot. And because I remember, because there's a fallen down house there, and there was beams that had fell down, and this thing stepped up on a beam, and I specifically remembered the digits going almost around this beam, because in the moonlight I could see this thing, and like I said, when the digits grabbed this beam and it stepped over it, I was like, what could this be? I mean, what has a hand for a foot?
Mm,
And I'm talking more than just like our hands. Well, I'm talking long digit, almost like longer than what a normal man's hand is as a foot. And then, like I said, its arms carried down, past its waist, not to its knees, but probably the mid of its thigh. And it was kind of lanky, but it when it walked very easily. I mean, we as bipedal people, we walk and we make a lot of noise as we walk in the woods if we don't watch what we're stepping on. This thing, it was almost like it just stride through it like it was nothing. I mean, it almost like it glided in a way. It was so at ease on the way it was structured and the way it was walking.
Its head didn't bounce like
No,
humans.
it didn't bounce. No. Its whole body kind of made a motion as it walked. It wasn't like its head bounced up and down. It was like its body made a motion, like it was. It almost looked like to me that, I mean, now I think back on it, it's almost to me that if it had to, it could go down to all fours and move faster if it needed to, just because the length of its arms and the way its feet and arms were. It was extreme, and that's why I can't get over it. It was extremely muscular. Like I said, its head was, it was more of a egg style head shape, and it had a cone almost to the back of its head. Um, I could not get a real close. I know it was human style looking in the head, but its head was more of a dome in the back. It had a larger cavity, like a brain cavity on it almost, and skeletonized it. Through the muscle. It was almost like you take a muscular skeleton and stretch a membrane around it, where you could see almost the bone structure and muscles of it. And that's why, when people tell me, oh, it was a mangy bear or something, I'm like, no, man, this wasn't a bear. There's no bear around here that are that tall and that, it was very muscular, but it wasn't built like a bear.
Right. Well, no, I mean, here's the thing is that we all know what things look like in the woods, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you saw a bear, and bears can get on their hindquarters, but
Yeah.
it's very usually they don't walk. The only time that they walk around on two legs bipedal is when they're trying to appear larger. They're trying to look at something.
Exactly.
And so dogs can harass them, but typically because bears don't have an apprehensile thumb,
Yeah.
they don't have the means of grasping. They
That's right.
they can throw something with their mouth, of course, but
Yeah.
they can't really throw it far. Usually it's more of an attacking motion up close. But
Exactly.
but for you to see something where it's shiny like that, could it be
And
oils from a hair? Sure it could,
yeah.
but you would know that because
Yeah.
at that age, at that close,
Didn't have a
you're
snout. It
you're
didn't
going to
have a
know.
hair. Didn't have a snout like a bear, and its skeleton, it was too. Its legs were too long to be a bear. It was too long of a skeleton of the dom from the pelvis to its lower legs. There's no way that it was designed to walk on all fours. Now I say that it may can run faster or move faster on all fours just because the length of its arms. Because with humans, it's hard for us to run on all fours because our legs are longer than our upper torso
Right.
or our arms, and our neck isn't structured to be that way. Well, this thing, like I said, its arms, muscular, skeletonized looking, long fingered. When it lingered across there, it looked like its arms were hitting about in the middle of its thigh.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and it, and like I said, I personally, when I first seen it, I'll tell you the way for me to describe how I've described it to some of my friends in the military. There was a movie that came out called Pumpkinhead, and came out in the '90s, late '80s, early '90s, something like that. That would be close to what I seen in a way, as
I,
far as the way the skeleton structure was.
okay.
And when I was in the service, I'd tell them this, and they'd be like, "Dude, that's the scariest shit I've ever heard." Because
Yeah.
if you see something like that as a child, and I said, "Yeah, it wasn't exactly like that, but that's the best way I can explain it. How it kind of moved and walked, and
That's your reference.
yeah, it's the reference I have, and that's when I talked to my friend who's an FX artist. I was telling him, I said, man, this thing really reminded me of the movie Pumpkinhead when I seen it, and I seen the movie later, and I thought, oh God, here's this thing, it looks similar to it. And he said, that's when he said, man, the best thing you do if you're not an artist, get some clay and sculpt it. You can add and take away clay. You can get pretty close to what you've seen with clay. And that's what I did. And my wife was like, I'm not an artist. And my wife was like, whatever you've seen, I believe you've seen it because you sculpted something that looks too much like it could live.
Yeah.
And And it was one of them, and like I said, when I posted it on the crypto site on Facebook, I thought it was really strange. This guy from St. Petersburg gets a hold of me immediately. Like, as soon as I posted, this guy contacts me, says, I know what these are. And I said, what? And he said, I had three of them in my kitchen. And I thought, in your kitchen? I thought, how did they get in your kitchen? These things are so big. And he went to telling me that he was told that there were reptilian soldiers. And I had never heard of any reptilian type thing before. And I touched a little research. But like I said, I don't know, and like I said, with the sighting of the sphere 3 days before, and then to find out 15 miles away in Hanson, there was a ball in the sky on fire for 3 nights that I didn't see, but they did. And I thought it was kind of strange that, here it is in 2019 or 2018, and someone from Hanson remembers, because all I said was something strange happened in the fall of '86, and he came across that, you mean the ball of fire in the sky? So I thought then it kind of put two and two together is there must be some kind of connection here.
Well, it sounds like there is. I mean, if you just look at that alone, that was my next point, is that we know it had strength, abnormal strength. We know it had abnormal size as far as in height. You could tell it that close that it was a lot taller than anything you had ever seen. A man, a bear. It had this hairless type body, so much so that the moonlight, it had some type of a sheen to it.
Yeah, exactly.
That you could even see the morphology or the structure of the head, and that you could even notice that as it went over this log, that it actually had some type of apprehensile type of grasping of its feet. It had long digits. So, with something like that, and with something that you saw, my inclination wants to say, I think it was more extraterrestrial in nature.
That's and that what I don't understand is after all this happened, that Monday morning, for it to be across the road in a sitting position, basically, crouched down. Because I thought about it after I sculpted this thing, and I thought about this bone structure, kind of because mechanics, living things all have mechanical joints, that kind of stuff. And as I looked at it, and as I looked at what I sculpted, and I was talking to my wife, and I was talking to my son, and my son deals with a lot of paleontologists and different people. The structure, it could get very low to the ground if it wanted to, because it has basically two different knees. It has a knee structure down by its feet, and then it has one, a standard knee. So this thing was crouched down. And at first, when my stepdad started, I thought it was a man across the way, crouched down in my neighbor's driveway. And then when it stood up, that's when it scared everybody. And like I said, it took off down this ditch line with ease. I mean, just fly down it. And we're talking about there's tall grass in the ditch, everything. We could see where it parted the grass, but there were no prints. And I was used to seeing prints. I mean, we tracked deer, bobcat. I mean, everything leaves a print. This thing did not leave a print in the ground.
Did you guys go over there and take a look what it was doing?
Yeah. We went over and looked, and all we could see is where the dirt had been brushed in the driveway, because we live on a dirt road, and we see where the dirt was brushed around, but it was just sitting there like it was waiting for someone to come out of the house.
So it was looking at least in your direction.
Yeah, because he went out on the front porch to use the bathroom, which faces the dirt road that we lived on, and he said he turned and seen something in the neighbor's ditch line, like over on his driveway. And when I came out, my mom came out with a gun. When we looked, this thing was looking straight at us.
Oh.
And it stood directly up. And then he went to grab the gun, and this thing flew down. I mean, just turned, and it was gone. And at first he thought it was a man. My stepdad thought it was a man, like somebody, being creepy or whatever, And once it stood up, he knew it wasn't a man. My mom didn't. My mom seen it too, and she knew it wasn't a man. And it spooked everybody for a while. It even spooked our neighbor when we told him about it. But after that, we never seen anything, never again. But after that, I never went into the woods again unless I was armed and I knew where I was going, and it was definitely not at night. So I don't know why, unless only thing I could ever think of is if this thing was curious, maybe of us, and was looking to see how we cohabitate or what. I don't know, but I
Well,
never could figure out why it would have came and stood, sat right there and been crouched down because, my stepdad used a lot of marijuana and stuff. They grow marijuana and stuff during the time. And he was a bad guy. I mean, he really was a bad guy. And like I said, he thought whenever I got home that morning after the hunt, they were all laughing about it. Oh, it must have been, a bear or somebody out in the woods is playing a, joke. I said, no, it wasn't. You guys didn't see this thing like I've seen it. And they
right.
all stunned me for it. It's like, you guys ran off. You guys, it must have scared you guys enough. You ran the hell home and left me out there. And come that Monday morning, whenever he's seen it again, it was a different story then.
Oh, I'm sure it was. What time was that?
It was about 4:00, 4:30 in the morning, somewhere around. Because I'd been up for a little bit getting his lunch ready and running his bath and getting his clothes ready. And I got up at 4:00 every morning because he would usually leave by 6. And the sun hadn't came up yet. I know that. It was right about almost around dawn. I mean, the sun was, you could see the sun kind of coming up, but it wasn't enough. It was still dark. And then, like I said, it was clear enough. During the September months around here, when the moon lights out where we lived, it was very clear, very clear. And like I said, he stood out there, he's taking a piss, and he's seen it. And he first didn't. He told me, so, well, I didn't really know what it was. I thought, what in the world's over in the driveway? And then he kind of seen it kind of move around, and he thought, whoa, what is this? So he started hollering for to get his rifle. And my mom heard it. She got out of bed and grabbed the rifle. By the time I got to the front door, she met me there. And when we both stepped out on the porch, this thing stood up. I mean, stood directly up. And then he grabbed the rifle and it turned and zoomed. It was gone. And like I said, we waited until sunlight. We did not leave that front porch until the sun got completely up. And then we went right across right across our driveway, or the road, and looked at it. And I remember it looked like the dirt had been swept around right there where it was setting or where it was kneeling or crouched. And then we could see where it cut through the grass and went off. It crossed a barbed wire fence, and we didn't know where it went from there. But we didn't find any prints. We didn't find any prints at all from this thing.
Well, that tells me that what tells me is that, when you don't find prints like that, what defines a print is a smaller surface area with heavy weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it probably, I'm sure it weighed quite a bit, but the displacement of, if you have a lot of digits and if it's wide and it's long, you're spreading out that surface area, then I'm sure it was, especially if it's over in a ditch with weeds, it probably literally is it's displacing weight well enough. It's hard to.
We could find the grass where it'd been, crushed down. But as far as leaving a print in the dirt or something, there were no prints, And that's what always got me all these years was not finding any prints because, you get wild pig and deer and bobcat and everything like that down here. We occasionally see a bear, but it would be like, not during that time. We didn't see bear because bear really into harvesting for the winter,
Right.
And bear around here are very rare to see anyway. We're getting more of them nowadays than we did back in the 80s. They're coming in from Arkansas. But during that time, I'd never seen anything like that. And like I said, I had a lot of friends that lived up at Nycut, and they were Indian, Native American, and I talked to them about it, and they didn't know. They said, well, maybe it was, Bigfoot with mange. And I'm like, no, even if Bigfoot didn't have no hair on him, he wouldn't look like this, I mean,
it's not the standard Bigfoot, what we would say, even though that there's probably variations like hybrids, what we call hybrids, but usually most all of them have some level of hair. So I want to say now, my brother and I, my brother Bill and I, we have taken I've taken, I don't know how many calls, over 2,000 calls in 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And so I've had more than probably, I don't know, 6 dozen calls within that time of people seeing something very similar to what you have described.
Oh, wow.
And now my toll-free number reaches out there, but I would say I've had people from Mexico and Canada definitely call in with very similar
Mm-hmm.
sightings. I had one gentleman I can think immediately I actually talked to about a month ago that was a security officer, if you will,
Yeah.
up in it was up in Canada, and he said this was back in 97,
Okay.
and he had a military law enforcement background. So these guys were
Okay.
hired special to basically to secure some really high dollar equipment
Okay.
and lumber, very expensive, millions of dollars of equipment.
Oh,
And
well.
they had a communications box they called the squirt box.
Okay.
And they get a call in the day of this guy just in panic. You guys got to come. You guys got to come. Get over here now. So they get there and they hear boom, boom. And they're like, what the heck? So they get out, they jump out of the truck, and they weren't that far away.
Yeah.
And this is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And they see this thing standing outside this metal squirt box. I mean, it's well contained, but this guy's inside, and
Yeah.
this creature is on the outside of this thing, and it has partial hair but partial skin. You could see the
Oh,
shininess of the skin,
okay.
and the morphology or look of this creature is that it's almost like you can definitely see the skeletal structure is very pronounced around the facial
Yeah.
area, the shoulders, and it's hitting this. It's about a little over 6 feet tall,
Uh-huh.
and it's hitting palms open, and it's not really rearing up and hitting it. It's almost like a Bruce Lee 1 inch punch,
Yeah.
but there's
Yeah.
so much force hitting it. It's literally just bam. And it's just amazing how much force this thing is. Well, they don't see the guys. This guy says it doesn't see me. And then when the guys are all locked and loaded and they have automatic firearms, they're decked out.
Yeah.
And with their military background, they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And he said this thing turned around, and when it looked at them, it had like almost like it had a double row of teeth,
Okay.
and it had ears that were pointed kind of back,
Okay.
and it did have a nose and eyes, dark eyes. Cheekbones were high, and when it looked at them, it hissed, which you
Huh.
would think it would yell, but
Yeah.
he said it sounded like you knocked off a nozzle on a propane bottle. It was like,
Oh, well. Yeah.
and it's like an adder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, what the heck? And this thing took a leap toward them, and they just unloaded on the head area.
Yeah.
When this thing finally perished on the ground, he said its skin structure was like it was wearing a bodysuit.
Huh.
The skin was tight and it was
Yeah.
shiny, had a little bit of hair. He said, but Lance, here's the thing. We called the authorities, the Canadian authorities,
Yeah.
and they were going to send this special Mountie law enforcement kind of guy. Well, they had a
Okay.
helicopter that flew out there. During this time, they waited an hour. He said during that hour, this thing like deflated. It went.
Oh, what?
It was like you. It wasn't really bulky, big like a Bigfoot would be. It
Yeah.
was lean, but wired tight.
Yeah. Exactly.
It was very strongly linky.
Yep.
And he says, now I don't know if we got a young one. This is as big as they get. I don't
Yeah.
know what. He goes, but this thing was strong. It leaped like, I don't know, 40 feet,
Yeah.
something like that. And he said this thing within an hour almost went like you took a bowl of jello out of the fridge, and then within an hour, how it just goes, it just
Oh.
kind of goes flat. He said this thing had already kind of semi went gelatin on me.
Uh-huh.
He said, you remember those Spyderco knives? And I said,
Yeah.
yeah. He said, well, I had one on me, and I tried to cut some of the tissue, and I couldn't cut it. It was
Huh.
like a fibrous Kevlar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said,
it's the only thing. I had a heck of a time trying to cut this thing. That it's tissue. It was like a. It wasn't normal muscular tissue. It was like a plant fibrous Kevlar.
Oh wow. Oh wow.
And so not everybody has heard this in interview that I've done, but they soon will.
Yeah.
It freaked him out. And when this Canadian law enforcement so-called guy got there, he this gentleman that I interviewed, he said that they basically cut this body with a special tool. They cut the legs off, they cut the arms off, and the torso, and they stuck it in these lined barrels that came with this helicopter. Like, these guys knew exactly what to do.
Exactly what it was. Yeah.
And then a guy came out, what this blood-like substance was, and he lit he torched the end of this like this torch gun, and it had a green flame on it, like it was a special type of gas on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he just pointed it at this ground where this blood-like substance had just lit the ground up and just burn it to a crisp. And this guy, this Canadian, he just says, well, as you guys being in law enforcement here, as you know, this should just kind of keep quiet. Well, they kept quiet, and the guy says, well, we'd keep quiet if there was a little bit of an incentive. So they paid the guys to be quiet for 20 years.
Wow. Wow.
And this thing, it's kind of reminiscent of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I could go on with some others, but
with the way you described the kind of lanky, textured muscle, that's the thing. This thing was definitely muscular. It definitely had a muscular shape, but it was a really thin kind of lanky, not really like a bodybuilder type, big and bulky. It was more, lanky and the muscle and the bone were kind of, you could see how this thing was made, almost the way it looked. I was stationed up at Colorado for quite some time. And I get good friends that worked at NORAD with 10 Special Forces group, because we did a lot of snooping and pooping for them, and we were good friends with them. My son, when he was little, would go and play in their compound and stuff. And I was talking to a colonel up there that I knew real well, and I was explaining what I seen to him, and he said, you wouldn't believe the things that people tell us they see up here. He said, personally, I haven't seen anything, but we get reports a lot right here in Colorado. And I said, what do you mean? Like things that I'm talking about? And he said, real similar. And I never kind of put things together on that, but I definitely think that the silver sphere had something connected to what I seen. And the other thing I was going to say, the only other thing that's weird in that area, not very far from there in the Nycut area, they used to have these, hot springs that everybody bathed at, right?
Right.
Well, until I found out they were radioactive. And the government came up in there and they concreted all that in. And you can go out there today and there's still these concreted like tubs where they concreted over these hot springs. Now, I don't know why they're radioactive, but that was one of the things that they said they were radioactive. And that's the only other weird thing around there where I live that I knew, it was kind of weird. But other than that, like I said, man, Lance, I have no idea. I just been on this journey to try to find out if other people have seen them and what they may be or what they're wanting or,
there's
what
two.
is it,
Yeah, there's a couple things you said there that, number one, how do I say this with it? I've learned over time in doing this show, if our government says that they're doing it because of X or we're doing this because of Y and Z, it's usually not because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
It's because of something else, typically. Now, could it have been radioactive? Of course it could have. For whatever reasons, I don't know. Someone knows, but we don't. But it could have been something else that it's not radioactive, but more or less trying to keep people from going there because they don't want them to see something or encounter something. That's
Well,
another.
I did a little research in my whole trying to find, and some of these type, like in the 1920s, there was a gentleman up in New York. He was a world renowned um, uh, structural engineer, and he did mainly underground structures. He did like they were building like the subway systems for New York, and he came in and his crew came in. They'd done a tunneling, and immediately after the tunnel was dug so far, he comes out and he says that him and his crew will never go back down there again. That they were these creatures down there that were humanoid, and
Yeah.
talking about these lizard creatures. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
he was shunned by all these countries because he says he's seen this, and this was under these tunnels. There was elaborate tunnels and all this other stuff. Well, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, where we live on a big um, old volcanic fault line. So, like right across the border in Arkansas, we have a diamond mine over there. That was the only reason the diamond mine's there is because of the volcanic activity long time ago.
Right.
And there's also, we know that there's undercover, we have caves. All matter of fact, where I live is called Cave Springs because there's giant caves down here that go miles and miles and miles, literally miles back in there. And the thing is, even when Mount St. Helens blew, there was ash coming out of caves over here where we live. That's how connected they are. So I was thinking, well, maybe this thing is subterranean, or maybe it's both. I don't know. Maybe there might be. I mean, I even went as far as thinking, looking into this reptilian thing, and they were talking about that they believe that they do live in the earth, that they're another population that live here on Earth, and these things that we're seeing in the sky are not extraterrestrial. They're terrestrial, but they're a more advanced species than what we are. And same thing up in Colorado. I talked to this colonel friend of mine that runs NORAD. They run 10th Special Forces Group. What they do is they protect NORAD, and you'll see them all the time on the side of the mountain doing drills and different things like that. But when I was talking to him about it, he said, Jeff, there's caves and stuff that we have found that go back farther than what we want to go back. And he said some of these same people in these areas talk about that their fourth great grandfather talked about some lizard man that came out of here back in here in the 1800s, 1900s. I mean, there's so many talks about these things possibly living underground. Well, that's what I started thinking. I thought, well, maybe there is some truth to this lizard thing, because maybe these things do, and maybe that's why they concreted those areas up. I don't know, but it's one thing as a child, a teenager, a 13-year-old, it definitely imprinted it in my mind. I mean, it's something I don't forget easily, even through all these years and being in other countries and through, combat and everything else. It's something that scares me to this day. And as having a son of my own, I was very protective of him going into the woods and places that we didn't know because of what I'd seen when I was young. And, my son graduates next month from OU as an anthropologist, and we've discussed it quite a bit. And he's done a little bit of research just on the ancient history of these tales and different things. And he says, Dad, I find stuff all the time. He said from India to biblical, and it's everywhere. I mean, it talks about these reptilian type people. And I said, Dad, it's in our history.
Yeah. If you look back in different documents, especially documents that now that our government has opened up about the UFOs here within the last year.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And there's thousands of documents that are released, of course, as you know, each year, and it's just sifting through it.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
If you go back far enough on these documents, it depends which literature you read. There are hundreds of different races, and I know this is going to sound really strange what I'm about to say, because I haven't really talked about this much.
Yeah.
There's hundreds of different type of extraterrestrial races in this universe.
Mm-hmm.
Our government knows many of them.
Yeah.
We've interacted with them. One of them is called the reptilians.
Mm-hmm.
And past presidents have actually made communications that I'm aware of through the readings of these documents,
Yeah.
and that they have made, as well as interacted more so with a group called the Greys. And there's
Yeah.
others out there. I'm just naming two
Yeah.
of many, many.
In my research of this, they talked about the reptilians, but they also talked about a race called the Dracos.
Yep.
And apparently they're another type of reptilian style type race that is extraterrestrial that, but I was going to tell you, in my business, I do a lot of interaction with government officials, mainly military in my business. And I had a friend who came by, matter of fact, he'll be here tomorrow. He just got out of the service after 22 years in the Navy. He was a intelligence officer for the submarine corps, and he was stationed out of Honolulu, Hawaii. And I'm talking to him because, I'm interested in that kind of stuff as far as the submarines and stuff. And he says, well, what I can tell you, because he said, are you asking about what the submarine hit? Because, we've had several submarines hit stuff underwater. And I said, well, not really. But he said, well, here's the deal. We've only charted 5% of the ocean. So most of our submarines stay in that charted water. But we do have submarines that are kind of like surveillance subs. They'll go out of that charted water next to these countries, raise their arrays, and gather information. And he said those are uncharted waters, so they can hit stuff underwater. And I said, well, what I was really going to talk to you about, man, was this whole Tic Tac event that they're talking about. He said, well, I'll tell you this, Jeff. He said, if it was a Navy aviator and they said they seen it, they got it on camera. He said, you got to believe them because them guys know what they're talking about. And he said, no Navy aviator would make up a story or even attempt to make up a story like that because they'd lose everything they've had, their rank, their flight and everything. He said, these things have been seen. They're out there. And he said, if you think about it, and he said, I'm not saying anything, but put two and two together. First, they said that they had this Tic Tac event off the coast of Florida and down by the Gulf of Mexico. He said, then what happens a month later? We set off a huge explosion out in the ocean. Matter of fact, it was the size, the explosion was up to a nuclear scale. And they said that it was to test the hulls of one of our ships to see what it would do, an explosion there. He said, Jeff, we don't do nuclear testing no more. He said, we've done that before. We did that back in the early days when we were testing nukes against the fleet and everything. So, and he's out now. And he said, so what were they blowing up underwater? And I didn't think about that. I was thinking about, well, you got and I read about the Tic Tac event and watched the films, and these things were coming out of the water and out maneuvering our aircraft. And then the Pentagon comes out and says, that we know they're not our adversary, meaning they're not China or Russia, but we don't know who they are. Well, ain't that shit to be kind of scary, man? These people have technology that our technology can't even, match. But how do you know it's not our adversary? If you don't know who they are, how do you know it ain't the Russians or the Chinese?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just it. The thing of it is, though, is that it seems like in a lot of the circumstances, though, I mean, here's the thing. With a lot of these documents that were leaked out, you actually have some of these extraterrestrials that most in general are very curious about our planet and about us.
Yeah.
We are very archaic compared to them.
Yeah.
But the one thing that they are fascinated with, believe it or not, it's very interesting, is this ability for us to have a soul. It's very interesting. One of the many, many, many things they're interested in.
Yeah.
The Eisenhower administration really made a lot of contact, as well as the Nixon administration during their time. But the reptilian is one. The reptilians tend to be a little, they're not necessarily a friendly group of species, apparently. Yeah. I don't claim to be an expert by no means, but I do a lot of reading, and my brother Bill does 5 times more reading than I do, spending a lot of time on these documents. Yeah. And what's interesting is that these species apparently have been around for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years.
Wow.
And they are much more advanced than we are. They
Yeah.
have, and even when you get into the Apollo missions,
Yeah.
when you get into the Apollo missions, when we first went around, Buzz Aldrin,
Yeah.
and they went around the moon, and you can find, if you're lucky enough, you can find when Buzz Aldrin and those guys were going around before they landed in
Mm-hmm.
'69. They went on the backside of the moon. Of course, the moon, as we all know, does not
Yeah.
rotate and spin like the Earth. We see
Yeah.
one side, we always see one side. And when they went on the backside of the moon, they said, guys, we got something down here. I'm seeing
Yeah.
lights. Well,
Yeah.
immediately, NASA switched to another channel.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately. When these guys came back down to Earth, they spent, I don't know how many days, how many hours straight in interrogation before
Mm-hmm.
the press was allowed to ask any questions.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting. And so it is very interesting that you saw this ship and then you saw this creature.
Yeah.
Could it be possible the two are completely unrelated? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But under the circumstances in which you saw this and then you see this creature, could there be a more of an association besides just coincidence?
Yeah.
It's possible. In fact,
Yeah.
it's very likely because of the time duration between seeing one and seeing
Yeah.
the other. Because between both, what was the time frame between seeing the ship and seeing this creature? How many days?
Well, it was on a Wednesday when we seen it, and it was Saturday night when we seen the creature.
See, so again, could it be just a coincidence? Of course. But
Yeah.
what is the likelihood?
Yeah, like I said, I've been out in the woods most of my life. Never seen anything like that in my life. Neither had my stepdad or his friend or my mom. And like I said, it's very weird that we have two weird things happen in the same week,
right.
But I was going to tell you, I just remember I was looking through some of the stuff that I printed off from this guy in St. Petersburg. He said, because I asked him, I said, what are these things you see in your kitchen doing? He said, it was very strange. They were looking and messing with utensils out of my drawers. That's what he wrote. Like they were odd-founded about what he had in his kitchen drawers, like his cooking utensils and stuff.
So did he say that he just awoke and found them?
He said that he got up in the middle of the night to go get something to drink, and when he got to his hallway, he noticed that he heard some rumbling around in his kitchen, and he thought it was an intruder. And as he made it around, he seen these things. They didn't see him; they seen them first. And he said he done the same thing. He just kind of hunkered down behind his couch, scared to death, until these things kind of wandered around his kitchen, messing with stuff, digging you through his utensil drawers, that kind of stuff. And then they walked gracefully right out his back door in his kitchen.
Okay, so I tell you why I tend to believe that whole scenario. Because usually if someone that I have found over time, if you're going to make up something,
Yeah.
usually you're going to be a bit more extravagant and dramatic in your made up story.
Yeah.
It's not going to be about kitchen utensils.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be, if we were making that story up, hey, yeah, I saw them. They took me, they injected me with something, then they floated me out the door and went on. It would get more dramatic like that. But I tend to believe something of that nature.
I do too. That's why when he told me that, I was like, really? They were just digging through your utensil drawers? He said, yeah, they were just digging through my stuff.
Yeah.
He said, then they all three just walked out the back door, and I didn't see them again. And I thought, and that's what I kind of thought about my incident with it. I thought, well, it's strange that it happened near this old farmhouse that was falling in. And then we see it down the next morning, we see it Monday morning across from our house looking. And I thought, well, in my own mind, as I've thought about this over the years, I thought maybe this thing was visiting people when they lived in that old house. way back. And then it comes here, and this house is gone. The family's been dead for a generation more. And then it goes to the next house that it finds, and it kind of is observing what's going on.
It's possible. It's very possible.
It still scared the shit out of me. I'm not saying I wasn't scared.
Oh, of course.
I was trying to put some logic to this, and I thought, well, it's kind of weird that it was behind this old house place, because there's nothing else in the woods. There's nothing else in them woods at all that I know of. I mean, I played in those woods and knew where the creeks were and everything. I've never seen anything like this, but I knew where this old house place is because the whole house has fallen down, and the people who lived there died. Their graves are right there on that property, and it's turned into a cattle field now. I mean, pretty much. And like I said, for it to come out from behind the house, out of the wood line, and then just kept on moving. It didn't stop or anything; it just kept on moving, and then to see it, we seen it again that Monday morning. I don't know what it was doing. I'm trying, it makes you feel, it almost, at first I had to say this to myself because I feared that it was coming, because there was nights I didn't sleep after that.
Oh, I'm sure.
I would cover my windows in my room and everything else because I was afraid this thing might be standing outside looking in, because it was kind of eerie that it was sitting there across the way in the driveway looking at our house, and being there. And I thought, well, hell, is this thing going to come and get me? What's going on?
Sure.
And so over the years, I've tried to think, now, if I was something that, why would it be the only thing connection out in that field? It ain't out there hunting deer, obviously. It had animals attacking it. And the only thing other than out there was that house place. So then I started thinking, well, if this was some type of extraterrestrial thing, maybe it came a long time ago where these people were alive and this house was still there. And maybe once it seen that this house was no longer there, it just went on to the next house, which would have been ours.
That's true. So that's very interesting, because some of the people that I've interviewed have had multiple visitations and some generational. So if you look at this, if you look at this creature from an anatomical, a gross anatomy standpoint, back when I was going to school, I remember our professor in anatomy, and we had the basic premise, and I remember one of the examinations would be, you're given a bone, and you're given an hour to write about this bone. Tell me about the relative size of this creature, how old it would have been, how much it would have weighed. Was it a herbivore, an omnivore, a vegetation eater? And you had to say, you had to tell everything about this just from a bone. So basically what he was saying is that structure begets function and function begets structure. So a creature's morphology is on how it's basically what it looks like, tells you a lot about its environment that it grew up in. So if it doesn't have hair, then obviously it doesn't need to keep warm.
It doesn't need
insulation from the outside. Now, could it have a metabolic rate that's much higher than ours? Sure, absolutely. If it has a lot of height, it could be obviously the DNA. So, but the structure of the feet, if it's really wide like that, that tells me, well, maybe it comes from a place that it needed to either be in water or plant life, thick vegetation that had to be above that. It had to have surface area to stay above. It's like flamingos walking on the lily pads and things like that.
Yeah.
So it tells me that this creature, this is why I say I don't think, because if you go deep underground, unless you're near volcanic activity, I think you can find environments deep within our soil that it is a perfect, hot, warm environment, very tropical in nature. But this is my understanding would be that a creature like this, there's two aspects. It's either extraterrestrial in nature, and it harbors underground during seasonal months in caves, and it goes deep to find those nice tropical temperatures,
like
or
hot and stuff.
or the Nephilim, which you hear that Nephilim or the Nephilim
Yeah.
of the book of Genesis chapter
Yeah.
6. You go through there, and basically Nephilim or Nephilim, fallen ones, the fallen
Yeah.
angels,
Yeah.
and their offspring. They were in bondage. The fallen angels, a third of them fell to heaven with Satan.
Yep.
And then their offspring, called the Gibor, were the ones that were left to roam at free.
Uh-huh.
So could it be that as well? So we have two aspects: something that's been here a long time, something that may have come here and been here a long time.
That's right. That's right.
So,
Thinking about it, I didn't tell you, the head, I remember what really was strange. It didn't have no ears. It didn't have ears. It had, kind of crevices where ears would have been, but it didn't have no ears. So like I said, it had kind of a flat pug nose. I remember that jawline came pretty low, high jaws. Its eyes were larger than our eyes for sure. And like I said, it had like a cone shaped head. It wasn't like what you think of in a Gray's head, it had that. No, this was more of a funnel in a way, like its head came to a point almost towards the rear. But it was the way the creature was built and the way it moved. It kind of moved it moved very flowing. Like it didn't have, like when we get old, we're increpid. We kind of hunch over. We're even when we're moving through the jungle and stuff, we're kind of clumsy. This thing wasn't clumsy. This thing moved elegantly across that field like it was nothing. Even when it came to where the house was falling down, when it stepped up on that, it was like it was a fluent motion. It didn't have to like fumble around. It just stepped and kept going, which could have been some of its height to allow it to do that. But it was
like, moving with purpose.
Yeah, it was exactly. It was moving with purpose, and it. I know it probably sensed my stepdad and his friend running off because I've seen it kind of turn and glance, but then it was right back onto the purpose it was, and it kept moving across this field, and these dogs kept on it the whole time, and it would sling them. It was nothing for this thing to sling it. And it didn't like it wasn't hurting the. I mean, they didn't act like these dogs were even hurting it. And that's what really got me, was why we had animals, canines attacking it. And that's what always threw me off, was because I thought, when I was young and, thought of aliens and stuff, I thought, ray guns and spacesuits and stuff like that. This thing, it didn't have any of that. But then I think about what the story you just told me about the guy up in Canada. If it's structure, if it's skin and muscle structure, if it's got a thin membrane type protection, then canine wouldn't be affecting it at all,
Which would coincide with what you're saying. These dogs, even though they're attacking,
more of a nuisance.
They're more of a nuisance, like get away, get out of my way, and it's still on a mission to do what it had to do. Or go.
And I kind of see how wildlife or animals would treat it, because they don't know what it is. And the first thing when a dog is in that flight or fight, so I raised German Shepherds for years for canine. And, you had some shepherds, it came to fight or flight. They knew if they were overpowered, matched, if they weren't trained well, they wouldn't attack. But if they were trained well, they would continue attack until, they just gave up or could not do it no more. But just a common dog or a common coyote, it normally, if it continued to attack something and it didn't hurt it too bad, they would continue as a pack to try to attack it. But I don't know what happened to those animals, because that Monday morning there was no animals around. This thing was quiet, sleek, and it blended in very well. Like I said, when my stepdad stepped out there and was using the bathroom, only reason he noticed its head moved, and he looked over and thought, well, what son of a bitch is standing across the way in my neighbor's driveway watching our house? Because he would, like I said, he dealt marijuana and different dope, and he was always very concerned about anyone that's watching the house or whatever.
Sure.
Then he thought it was a guy watching the house. He thought it was somebody. And that's when he started hollering for the rifle. And when we got to the doorway, I watched this thing stand up. And I knew then it was the exact same thing that I'd seen out there in that field. And I mean, it petrified me, because I was like, this thing was watching us. This thing was across the way watching us a day later, and from then on, I thought, nightfall came, I was in the house. I took care of our livestock, and then I was in the house because I didn't know where this thing was, and I never seen it again since then. I've never seen it or had anything experienced like that.
Well,
but still,
it kind of adds a little bit, even though the gentleman, you said he was in Russia with the three, it adds. So if these creatures have, you remember what I said? They have this affinity to observe, and they're curious with our daily activities, and they're curious of who we are and what we eat, how we sustain ourselves, and the tools in our life that we use. Well, that's why I say I really am of the belief that I do believe what that gentleman had said about looking at you. Just, we look at a fork and we go, it's a fork, for crying out loud. Who cares?
Exactly.
But if you've never been here before, you're looking at everything around that we use in our life. So this creature, this being in the ditch looking, he probably, now we don't understand too the abilities he might have. Does he have super, the auditory, is his auditory so acute they could hear everything in the house?
Yeah, that's true.
We think, our mind is very linear.
Yeah.
A and B is C. You start here and your destination is there. Well, it's going to take me X amount of time with X amount of distance to get there. If I'm going this many knots, this many miles an hour, this many kilometers an hour, whatever. But really, in another way, how we think about things like that is very archaic.
Yeah,
because when you get into this multi-dimensional type of universe, time and space is one.
Yeah,
they're one. So also, we don't know the abilities that this creature really had. So, if it had, it makes sense if it had a tougher skin. That the dogs were just annoyance. I mean, if you're actually being hurt, then you're stopping. You're trying to do everything you can just to live.
That's right. And that's why, even whenever it was moving across the field, now that I think about it and how the dogs, how it was just a nuisance to it, it wasn't worried about them dogs. It wasn't worried about anything because it moved like it had a purpose. It didn't just like linger out in the field and do jumping jacks and roll around in the grass. It was moving. It was, it was cutting across there and moving, versus something, it wasn't, it didn't seem, like I said, the dogs seemed like it was, the animals that were attacking it seemed like it was just a nuisance to it. And it makes sense. I mean, now that I look at it, where it was heading in that direction, if I draw a beeline from that direction, it would have went directly where my neighbor's house was and just down the road where mine was. I mean, in the direction that it was going. So I don't know, man. It was one of them things, like I said, I talked to Bob about it, and, I told you, I mean, to this day, it brings chill bumps on me thinking about that night and what goes on, that it's affected me enough that here I am 48 years old and I'm still, stunned about what I seen and what happened. And I guess the biggest question that I have in it all was, what was the purpose? What was it, kind of thing. And I think that's what makes all of us, when we see stuff like this, to go look and venture into trying to figure out what it is,
Right.
And my wife believes me. My wife, she doesn't believe a lot of things, but she believes me what I've seen, because I've told her about it. And over the years we've discussed it and different things. And, I would love to have made up the story that I was aboard a spaceship or something, as a kid, but that ain't the story I had, and everybody always tells me, well, they're not malevolent creatures. They're not here to do evil to. As a 13-year-old watching these things come across the field and the size it was, it felt malevolent. It felt like, and tear me to pieces,
I think there's some truth to what you're saying. I think that these beings can be malevolent, are malevolent in many ways. I think that here's the thing: if we call them the Nephilim, and let me back up. Could there be Nephilim on this Earth? Of course, we know that. I know that.
Yeah.
That could be misconstrued or misidentified as extraterrestrial, and extraterrestrial misidentified as Nephilim.
Yeah,
I think so. It
yeah,
makes sense. It makes sense to me. So, I want to give the Nephilim, to me, when we talk about Bigfoot, we talk about
yeah,
something that has hair, that has more of a primitive nature or look to it.
Yeah,
I think more of this archaic, raw type of creature that has supernatural abilities. In fact, the Bible talks about supernatural abilities that these beasts have.
yeah,
And so when I think of something that is devoid of hair, having a
yeah,
multi-joint system
yeah,
with very interesting digits, and here's the thing. When we look at a ship, one thing that our mind doesn't think of really next, but it's the obvious thing, is that, okay, I see a ship floating right there. I see a ship moving. Could they be unmanned? Sure.
yeah,
But what's the likelihood that it's actually has occupants? It's probably very likely there's occupants flying that ship right now that I'm looking at. And I had an experience when I was about 10 years old. I saw a ship in the daytime. And,
oh, wow.
And I had an experience when I saw it. And I was by myself. It was in the fall time. And it was just out. It was at Greenleaf State Park.
Yeah, I don't live very far from there.
And I saw it. And I know what I saw. And it was coming down closer and closer. And so at the time when I saw this, and this, think about years, it makes sense. Watching some of the documentaries with Dr. Stephen Greer, who's a medical doctor, who's now turned, who now informs the presidents about these UFOs.
Yeah.
And a whole host of other things. And now he has a lot of whistleblowers that's kind of come on to his side, talking about these underground bases and deep underground caverns and et cetera, et cetera. But basically that these creatures, a lot of these extraterrestrials, have lived on our planet cohabitating with us for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah.
And that they do venture out and they do look and observe what we do. And I know that sounds very, very odd to say, like as if I'm an expert. I am not, but I read a lot of interesting documents. And so I think they're very much like
the same thing. We do the exact same thing to animals.
You're going to be observant of what you do, the actions of someone, the tools they use. Now, again, do I think some of them are up to no good? Yeah, I think so too. I think some mean no harm.
Yeah.
And I think we have those species as well. But even during the Eisenhower administration and the Roosevelt, or not the Roosevelt, no, I think it was during the Eisenhower administration. Apparently there was a meeting with, I think it was the Greys, and there was an exchange of, and there's some documents out there that are floating around. Now, I can't authenticate them that much, but I will say this. The premise behind this meeting was that if they can abduct humans through the year and do research on animals and humans, then they will exchange technology, energy technology, advancement technology, communication technology in exchange for them allowing them to do that. I know that sounds extremely bizarre, unethical, and a whole.
No, I've looked at, we always talk about the Roswell incident, and everybody always talks about it, but there's been other incidents even in Russia before that. And one of the things that I tell people is look at the technology jump that occurred after the Roswell incident and where our technology before the Roswell incident was. I mean, we were using flash tubes and solid state resistors. And after the Roswell event, our technology jumped majorly. And I tell people too, I said, the Russians talk about it too. I have friends in Russia that are Smesnov and different things. And they've talked about their own Roswell incidents that they had occur. But we were talking about the moon earlier, and my son, because I've had him doing research because it's something for him to do while he's in college, and he works at the Sam Noble Museum there in Norman.
Oh yeah,
and he was just doing the Guatemala collection of textiles, and he was talking to a Mayan specialist, and they were talking about reptilian style gods that the Mayans believed in, and he said, well, that the moon was brought here by their god, by their religion. And my son said, what do you mean? He said, well, the Mayans said that the watchers, the people up in wherever their gods, brought the moon here to watch us from. And me and my wife were talking about, I said, there's a lot of strange stuff with the moon. The moon is distanced from the earth at a certain point that it collects most of the solar radiation and deflects a lot of the stuff that would have hit earth for life to evolve on this planet. I said, not only that, I said, the moon's control a lot of the tides, and even some people, that's where lunacy came from, to be a lunatic.
That's right.
It affects people. And I said, so, with the Mayans saying that there was no moon and then it was brought here by their gods, you kind of think, and then they do have reptilian gods that they believe in. Same thing with, when we think of the Adam and Eve story, when we talk about, the serpent that spoke to Adam and Eve, it says, it used to walk basically bipedal and had arms and legs and could speak to man. And one of the things that God put on the serpent was it had to, slither on its stomach. So did serpents have legs and arms and they could speak to us? There's a lot of things that in history from India and different things that we've looked up about these reptilian type creatures that are out there, even from the Mesopotamians. And my son verified it. He said, Dad, I've looked at the pictures and I've talked and done the study. The Mesopotamians actually had figurines of them saying that they done common things from planting crops to, raising their young and everything else they talk about.
Well, so, if you look in the scripture in Numbers 29:9, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it says basically God knows much of what we know very little about or of. And so basically that scripture, I'm paraphrasing that, but that's something to look at, Numbers 29:9. And it basically, there's so much that God has not revealed to us. We cannot be smarter than the Creator who created us.
It's true.
And so to reveal everything to us might just be not only a hindrance, but a huge emotional and mental burden to us to reveal everything in this state, in this physical body that we're in. And that's something that's how I reconcile or come to understand a lot of what we just don't know is that
I think if we knew of everything, it would destroy us in a way. We mentally could not comprehend some of this stuff if we knew it. It would be because we always want to think that we're the top of the food chain. We can protect, we can do things, everything. But then when we feel like there's something out there that may be more advanced than us, that we're not top of the food chain, then we get scared. And when humans get scared, we build weapons, we attack things, we do things of that nature. We're kind of still primal in that way. And that's one of the things me and my son talked about, because one of the problems with like OU is they want to teach the whole, we had developed from apes, and, there was Deniscium and Homo sapien and Neanderthal, which we know those species were here. We had different human species here, but they want to say basically we crawled out of primordial ooze and became who we are. My son doesn't believe it. He says, there's no way, Dad. He said, there's no way we could have been, he said, what it would have took, the chances it would have took that certain things had to happen for life to form on this planet by itself. We were engineered. He said, there's no offense about it. And I said, well, I kind of look at the Bible at that. When we think of engineering, when we talk about Noah and Adam and the age they were, we don't hear about ages like that anymore. So, it kind of makes you think that maybe humans lived a lot longer, or they were designed to live a lot longer back then to do maybe certain stuff. I've watched a couple of shows, alien, ancient alien stuff. And one of the things that really struck in my mind was, if there was a race of aliens that, or of God that made us, then we were either made for labor because we could breathe this atmosphere, and yeah, they could have. I mean, we're doing genetic manipulations to things already as our species is. And to say that someone couldn't come to this earth and take something from the wild and genetically mutate it to a human, we have to believe it can be done, because we share almost everything that a chimp does except for like one chromosome. And it's really, really close. But we share stuff with everything on this planet as far as DNA, or our chromosome, way we are. And so we definitely are earthlings. We came from this planet, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
but if you were an alien species that came to this planet, I mean, why was gold so? I mean, I've been to the Great Pyramids in Egypt and in Cairo. Why was gold such an important thing to ancient man? Because the gods wanted it. And you know what? I tell people all the time, I've stood at all the pyramids and the Sphinx, and I look at it and I'm like, we don't have technology to this day that can move these stones. And we're supposed to be very advanced, but we're claiming that this group of people that lived during this time was able to build these temples by building sand ramps and using lumber and water. I just can't see it. I can't see it. If we don't have the technology today, the most advanced technology that we think of humans to move stones that big, then how did they do it?
Well,
and why
they had time to ponder. Some other thoughts is that they had time to ponder this.
Yeah.
Nowadays, very few people are deep thinkers.
Yeah.
And so they use the stars. They had and what's really interesting is that a lot of the pyramids were being built about the same time frame, with cultures not able to communicate between cultures.
That's exactly right. There was pyramids all around the world.
So how did this
exactly,
this mass collection of intellect, of thought happen? And this gets into a whole nother subject matter about collective consciousness or collective thought. About that. Well, that could be for another show, but I'll just tell you that we're all connected more than what people think.
Yeah.
And I remember when I'm a retired healthcare provider, and I remember I was buying this practice, and this doctor I was buying his practice, he'd been practiced almost 40 years, and he said, when you buy my practice, I'll go over this book with you. And I thought it was like a tax accounting book or something.
Yeah.
And everything went through, and then he opened this book up, and it was tattered and torn, had a lot of highlights in it. And I'm looking, it had names, addresses, phone numbers, and dates. And I'm looking at this thinking, okay. He said, as simple as this is, I'm going to tell you the mystery and the specialness of what you see. He said, this has built my practice more than what you think. I said, okay. He said, I go down the list of all the patients, and I see the last time they were in, I think a good thought, I say their name, I close my eyes, and I say, if they need me, I pray that they come and call, and I will take good care of them. And then he marks a line through them and goes to the next person. He gives a mental image of them, and then he says their name, and he says, if this person needs me, I pray that they will call me soon. And then he just does this. He does 10 a day.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay. And he says, I can tell you're not getting it, so I'll just tell you. He said, there's no accident. God gave us some very special gifts to us that many people don't realize they have. Some people do. They get an interesting taste of it every once in a while. But basically what it means is that, have you ever thought of somebody, and they called you or bumped into you, and you go, oh my gosh, I was just thinking of you.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. Yeah.
All the time with everybody. And I said, of course, many times. He said, That's not an accident, Lance. That's not an accident.
Mhm.
You put out there this thought. Thoughts are impulses. What are impulses? It's electrical energy. This is not
Yeah.
anything mysterious. We know that that's what it is. He goes, if I tell you to move your right index finger, can you move it? And I said, well, yeah. And he goes, yeah, that's electrical. That's a thought. You heard me and you thought about it, and it took just a fraction of a second. And then you moved your right index finger. That is electrical impulses. He said the
Well,
same is true with mental thought.
well, if you think about it, even the military and the government, they played around with, you know, being able to use psychic events or use the mind to, you
Oh,
know, for
yeah, they did remote viewing a lot.
remote viewing. Exactly. And they even said, you know, even after those tests were done, they said, you know, 80% of the time they were correct. And
Yeah. That's
that's
why they
really,
did it. I mean,
yeah.
yeah, they did that at Stanford University,
Hmm.
and is when they started it out, and it kind of freaked our government out a little bit when there was people, especially one gentleman that was able to go into a deep, very high security, very secret military installation, very thick walls, and budge a seismograph meter there.
Oh, wow.
And then when he said what he was going to do, and he's never been there, and he did it, that really opened up their
Yeah.
eyes, and kind of the CIA and everybody kind of freaked out a little bit. Not so much about what this guy did specifically, but in a way, yes,
Yeah.
because if he can do it, who
Yeah.
else? Who
They
else
felt
can go in
comfortable.
there? So
Exactly.
anyway, it's basically this doctor basically said this is a gift, Lance, but not everybody knows how to control this gift. It takes a lot of focus and clarity of thought. So what do you think about our people, the people that lived long ago, when you don't have anything interrupting their clarity of thought? What is possible? What could they achieve having clarity of thought? Uh, but I'm in
Well,
agreement with you.
uh,
How did
yeah.
these stones get so perfectly cut? I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many questions that we have, and
Yeah.
so many drawings on caves,
Well,
and
there's been things found in Egypt, and I was talking to people when I was over there. There's been basically ancient Egyptian writings stating that giants helped build the pyramids. And Merlin, well, when we even talk about Stonehenge, um, they mentioned giants helped build it too. I mean, so I, it's one of those things. Is biblically we know there were giants here on Earth, and I believe that they still were, and I think they're being hidden from us, the remains and different things.
well, they're still
Um,
here in many ways
yeah,
because the Bigfoot or Sasquatch, the Yeti, the
exactly.
skunk ape, they're still here, and there's an alteration of their DNA that gives them this giantism. And
Yep.
so they're still here, but I also am in total agreement with you that when we consider a giant or gigantic type of
Yeah.
humanoid looking being still present, I believe there's pockets of them still around the planet.
But we got into kind of a controversial deal with his professor because he was talking about giants. Because here in Oklahoma, back in the 30s, there was a professor who was over the anthropology department at OU. And he was called out to a river not very far from Oklahoma City because human remains were found. And those human remains, he measured them by measuring each bone and determined that they were of giants. They were 10 to 15 feet tall. And he was ostracized to the point that, well, there were so many news articles in like Mississippi and Missouri and everywhere else. And actually, it had where they were turned, all the bones were turned over to the Smithsonian. There were lot numbers, all that stuff. So my son found one of the news articles and went to the anthropology department at OU and was looking into it, asking about. He finally just asked about this professor, and they all started giggling and laughing. They said, "Oh, you don't want to go that way. You're starting out on the wrong foot. That guy was a joke. He didn't know what he did." And he says, "But that doesn't make sense because he was over the anthropology department until he found this." And then he was ostracized because of it. And these remains are nowhere to be found by the Smithsonian or anything. And so it's one of those deals. They said, asked my son, basically, how would you think giants would live here on Earth? He said, well, we have remains of giant trees. We have remains of giant anteaters. We have remains of giant beavers. We have remains of giant sloths. We have, giant flowers, giant fruits, all these things. So you tell me why there couldn't have been a giant human, which kind of makes sense in a way,
Well,
we know.
and then, yeah, back in the war in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, there was 2 separate letters written by 2 separate civil engineers when they were building an airport there for the United States government. And they were written 2 different civil engineers. And they had this heavy equipment, and when they were out there digging on the Aleutian Islands, they came upon these giant femur, giant humerus bones. Yeah. And they wrote 2 separate letters to 2 different people. One was to their superiors. One was to head of engineering, and I think another one went to a direct supervisor there at the base there in Alaska, which ultimately got to, guess who flew out in a short time? The Smithsonian. And back in the day, the Smithsonian was the archaeological police.
Yep, exactly.
And then so there's a lot of truth to the ending of the movie Indiana Jones, where they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant and the chalice that Christ drank out of.
Yep.
And so at the end of the show, where it shows that the goblet was put into this crate.
Yeah, and then it's put in a big warehouse.
And so there is some truth, I think, to that.
Prime example, here in Oklahoma, there's down here where we live, spiral mounds.
Oh, yeah.
You probably heard of.
Oh, yeah.
Back before Oklahoma became a state, mining corporations would get permits to come up here and probe for precious minerals, but really what they were doing is they were coming raiding these burial mounds. And my son, working at the Sam Noble Museum, where some of the largest collection of these things from the spiral mound are at, they've been able to research and find them on the black market and overseas in Europe and all these things that were took from there. Their stories. And they said that the largest mound held about a 12-foot woman who was surrounded. She was buried there, but she was surrounded by men that were at least anywhere from 8 to 9 feet tall in a circular pattern around her when they cut into this spiral, into this mound. And there were children out there watching these people do it. And they said they brought out a cloak that was made out of raven feathers. And they spread it out on the ground, which it deteriorated almost rapidly. But if you ever get a chance to go to the Sam Noble Museum and look at the collection of the stuff from the Spiral Mound, it's going to make you think, wow, because the machining on some of the jewelry, the vases, stuff like that, it's perfect. We're talking about people that they said they had no machines, to do milling or lathe work, that kind of stuff.
That's fascinating.
It's very fascinating. Well, then is what really gets me is the copper. They had tons of copper. The people from Spiral Mound did. They built jewelry, weapons, and bowls and different things like that out of copper. Well, the Native Americans all say that there used to be a race of giants that lived up by the Great Lakes. And they were these giant, and the Cherokee talk about them too. I've talked to many Cherokee, and they talk about when they're down in Kentucky that they were cannibals. They ate them. They tell people not to go up in the mountains because the giants would get you and eat you. Well, apparently, in the early days of our country being found by Europeans, some of the Native American tribes actually told these Europeans that they were going to bring a chieftain from this tribe of giants down to meet him. In this document, this chieftain shows up. He's, a very large, they say very humongous, 10 to 12 feet tall. And he was adorned by copper adorned by copper and brass, or I said copper. Well, they just found out recently because up by the Great Lakes, there's an island out there, and the Native Americans always said that's where the giant people came from. They had all the copper. Well, they go out there; it's one of the largest copper deposits in the world, and they just now are starting DNA, or they're starting to analyze copper from over like in Israel and those areas, and this copper is coming back as a DNA basically trace back to this island. So it's almost like they had a trade route to the Middle East. This species, these species of people did. Well, what else do we hear in the Middle East? We know the biblical Bible talks about giants and David and Goliath and the other giants that he slew, and we know copper was, it made they were tin. They made bronze, and bronze was made for swords.
That's right.
And it kind of goes back to the whole the fallen ones, basically, in the book of Noah's grandfather, Enoch. He talks about how they taught people knowledge. They taught them how to build fire and forge materials and do these things. And you think about that and you think, okay, we're talking about something involved with the Nephilims. And it says that there were giants among them. The sons of God seen the women of earth, and that they were beautiful, and they bore giants and men of old. Well, how do we know that these Nephilims weren't part of this giant thing that, and it was their trade route? They brought this, all the way from the Great Lakes. They brought, copper to the Middle Eastern country. And that's why we may not have a large history on it, but they have found so many remains here in the United States of giants versus what they found overseas,
Yeah. There's so much. I mean, you're bringing up very good points. There's so much here. What I might have to do, just because I'm getting ready to run out of
no problem.
Audio space here, is why don't we have you for like a part 2, if that's okay?
Yeah, that sounds great, because I have another thing that I want to discuss with you, and it has to do with my family in our Irish history and some of the stories that my family said and some of the things that have happened to me. We recently went over to Ireland twice within the last couple of years, and I found my 25th great grandfather's grave. And I'll have to tell you some things. I don't want to leave into it, but it has to do with Irish folktale, and it's even in the 1800s, my grandmother was involved in a bunch of stuff in this region, and some strange stories came about. And this was told by my great grandfather dying on his deathbed to my grandmother and my mom. And later on, when I was in the service, there was an incident that happened, and it was kind of a strange deal. But yeah, I would be more than happy to come on for a second.
Why don't we do same time next week? How's that?
Okay. That sounds good, sir. I'll see you then.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate your time, and I'm going to think of some questions going back through. There's a lot that we spoke about, and it's all fascinating and interesting. So thank you so much, and I look forward to next week.
I appreciate the conversation. Like I said, I appreciate the help just to try to figure out what I may have seen in now knowing that other people have kind of had, similar sightings. It brings a little peace to my mind that I'm not being haunted by something that, out to do menacing things to me, that it might be just something that, is this one of those.
Well, I think you were unfortunately, however you want to look at this, everybody's different. You were at the right place at the right time to see something that you never expected. And my brother Lane likes to say it this way: if people only knew what is out there in the woods, in the rural city alleyways, when they dump trash, what's walking on the plains, whether it's Oklahoma, whether it's in the woods of Colorado, Washington, Oregon, the Great Lakes area, to the tumbleweed state of Texas, if people only knew what is going bump in the night, they wouldn't even dare get outside. The world is much more mysterious than what is really out there.
In the way I felt about back whenever I was a teenager and seeing it, knowing that my stepdad was armed with the rifle, I don't think the rifle would have hurt it. I honestly think he knew that too. That's why he ran. We had that fight and flight just like our other animals have. We either stand or fight or we run. And him and his buddy, the first deal was to run. I was just a circumstance of this incident because I couldn't run. I had to hide and watch this thing, and it terrified me, to see it. And now looking back on it, I don't think even engaging it with modern primitive firearms, I don't think it would have done anything if not irritated it.
No, but I can tell you honestly what would have stopped it. Because every time that a guest, has been on a show and they've encountered something very bizarre like that, and every time, I would like someone to prove me wrong, I'll put it that way. Every time a guest has mentioned the word Jesus Christ, the being or creature leaves right then.
And so that tells you that they're afraid of that.
Yes.
So something in the power of that name has frightened these things or these creatures or these beings or these other races. It's almost like if you roll through Los Angeles and you roll into an area and it says the Crips, we all like, holy crap, we got to get out of here. This gang's here, they'll kill you. And it's almost in that same concept of when them creatures hear that name or these beings or these species, it's like they know them. They know they're getting involved.
Which gets back to the interest that I was telling you earlier, that from years and decades ago, that these extraterrestrials, these beings, these civilizations, had an interest in our living because we had something called a soul, and we had a savior, Jesus Christ, that they themselves did not apparently possess. And that was the high affinity or interest, and that we had this energy about us that they didn't have. They have abilities and they have different types of high technology. But anyway, it kind of wraps around and entangles through all of this. But I find it highly fascinating and very thankful that in all these interviews that I've done in the last 5 years, anytime someone has had an encounter like that with something they just had no clue what it was, or a Bigfoot or a hairy creature or whatever, every time...
I was praying. I was praying that it would leave me alone. I was praying to God that it didn't see me. I was praying to God that it would leave me alone and not come and get me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think about that now as a 13-year-old, a teenager in underneath a cedar tree, praying to God that this thing won't come near me or come after me. There makes sense. I mean, I don't care who you are, if you're religious or not. And that's why I tell people when I was in the service, I've never met an atheist in a foxhole. In combat, everybody believes in God.
That's right.
Jesus. And so that being said, it's the same thing that occurred to me when I was 13. I went to church and I was saved, and I knew that God was there and I prayed for him, because I definitely was scared. And so maybe who knows? Maybe that's what kept it from coming over there. And
I'll end with this right there. That's very interesting. In the book of Acts, there's a parable where Satan is approached by this vagabond, and the vagabond basically says he goes to Satan, and he kind of ends up trying to intimidate Satan. And Satan says, I know Jesus and I know Paul, but who are ye? In other words, who are you? And this vagabond was trying to say, in the power of Jesus, you need to do this, and I command you to do that. And Satan looked at him and he said, wait a minute. I know Jesus and I know Paul, but I don't know you. And Satan ends up kicking his butt and bloodies him. So the difference is that it's one thing to say the name, but it's another thing to believe have faith in it and say that he is the Son of God. Two different things.
Even biblical, we've seen that with, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, standing on the word of God when they were thrown inside the furnace. They didn't even come out the hair singed on their head. That's or right. David and Goliath, or we as children, we learn how to drink the milk. And as adults, we learn how to eat the meat. And that's the best way it's ever been explained to me, is how to understand stuff about the Bible, and that say, children, we believe in the story of Noah and the Ark. We think he gets all the animals together and puts them on there and do it. And just like, Goliath, we believe, oh, Goliath picked up a stone sling and, killed this big giant. But we really don't realize David really didn't kill Goliath. He used God. God's the one, the power of God is what kills Goliath.
Yeah.
And so it is what it is. But like I said, it's been great talking to you. And I look forward to next week, and we'll talk again.
Sounds great. You have a wonderful evening, sir.
You too, sir. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. All right. Lot we talked about, guys. We started off with what happened to the very beginning and this creature, this being. That's the great thing about doing some of these interviews is that I can only relate through a lot of what other people have really shared with me that I get to share with you, that we can all learn together. In my mind, it's almost like this creature was with the ship scene days before, and then this creature shows up. It's almost like a too good to not associate that this creature was extraterrestrial in nature, especially ships like this. Now, I'm not saying the military hasn't come up with ships like this in the past and not divulged it to us, the public, John Q. Citizen. I'm sure they have at one point or another. But I'm just saying that I think that the incidence of this is too high not to associate ship being very unusual looking, no hair, very interesting morphology, almost like an exoskeleton that you lay a skin over, that just you can see that the cranium is totally different. The shoulders are very different. And what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to show you a picture that he sent me of what he sculpted, what Jeff sculpted when he was a kid, and you tell me what he saw. I have had people send similar things like this, but that's a very good point. If any of you see something out there that just frightens you, that's just not a Bigfoot, not a dog man type creature, get some clay. You can go to Hobby Lobby, get some clay, and try to sculpt what you saw. I think that you would, if you have enough courage to do that. If it's too soon, don't worry about it. But one of the things that helps cope is to either draw it out, if you can draw, or sculpt it out. So really, that's a great lesson with Jeff. By sculpting it, he was actually learning to cope with what he saw. He's still dealing with it, obviously. My apologies back and forth trying to go off camera and come back here. I've been battling a lot of sinus issues. The hay fever season's really high right now. So I was trying to go off camera and my eyes are watering terribly here. So my apologies back and forth here. But sculpting is a way that you can cope with what you saw. And I'm going to come up. We're going to have Jeff on again. I know we kind of got off tangent a little bit talking about some other things and extraterrestrials, but it kind of falls in line. So the Nephilim that we believe a lot of these, Bigfoot and Dogman type creatures are, in many ways, could he have seen the same thing that you could call a Nephilim? Yes. But do I think there's misinterpretation of the Nephilim to extraterrestrial and extraterrestrial and Nephilim? I'm sure there is. Where is that line at? I don't know. I don't know. But when you see what he sent me of the sculpture he made, it's nothing that I've ever seen before. In many ways, I hope I never do. But a lot of people have, because I've interviewed people that seen similar things, and I've got a pretty good memory on all the interviews that I've ever done. And I probably have about 3 dozen, so maybe 4 dozen interviews over 5 years in which people have seen very similar things as Jeff. But Jeff took it a little bit further, and he actually sculpted it, which turned out, I have to say, quite terrifying for a kid at 13 years old to see this. So I'll add those pictures too, somewhere during the show. In the meantime, guys, thank you so much for hanging in there. I appreciate you guys more than you know. My apologies again for coming off camera back and forth. I was trying to keep my nose and eyes in sync here.
just because the hay fever season, allergy season is pretty high right now. But in the meantime, guys, stay safe out there and always stay alert. In the meantime, and until next time, this is Lance with Monster 911. Take care, everybody.